Poor Maid was forced by debt to marry a CEO in Coma, until he woke up and asked, "Where's my wife?" The marble floor gleamed beneath Chloe's hands as she scrubbed silently in the grand foyer of the Galloway estate. The chandelier above her cast long reflections that danced across the polished tiles. It was nearly sunset, but her shift wasn't over yet. She adjusted the simple Navy maid's uniform and brushed a strand of blonde hair back into the bun at the nape of her neck. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She hesitated. Phones were forbidden during work hours, especially in the main house. But something about the urgency made her heart skip. She stepped into a shadowed alcove and answered quietly. "Hello?" "Chloe." It was her neighbor, Mrs. Lang from across the hall at the apartment. "It's your sister," the hospital called. Her heart's acting up again. "They said she needs surgery, soon." Chloe's hand trembled. "Surgery?" "But the doctors said." "She's getting worse, honey. They're not sure she'll make it through the month without it." Chloe's throat tightened. "What about the charity aid?" "They declined. Your father's debts flagged the application." Of course. Her father had left them with nothing but overdue bills and a tarnished name. She was drowning in his legacy, and now it was pulling her sister down too. "I'll figure it out," she whispered, but her voice cracked. When she ended the call, her legs buckled beneath her. She crouched behind a column, staring at the floor. There was no one to ask for help, no savings, no family left. Only her job as a live-in maid for the Galloways, one of the richest families in the state. "Eavesdropping isn't very ladylike," came a smooth, sharp voice. Chloe froze. Vivian Galloway stood a few feet away, clad in an ivory silk blouse and pearls, watching her like a cat watches a trembling mouse. "I wasn't." Chloe stood quickly, heart hammering. Vivian held up a hand. "Relax. I wasn't accusing. I was listening." She tilted her head slightly. "Your sister. Congenital heart defect, yes?" Chloe stiffened. "How do you know?" "I make it my business to know the staff in my house." Vivian walked slowly toward her. "And I believe we might be able to help one another." Chloe didn't speak, unsure whether to run or stay. "My son, Everett," Vivian continued, her tone now businesslike, "lies in a hospital bed, comatose for the past 8 months. According to my late husband's will, he must be legally married before his 30th birthday, in 2 weeks, if he is to inherit his share of the estate." Chloe blinked. "But he's unconscious." "Yes." Vivian's smile was razor thin. "And if he remains unmarried, the entire estate passes to me and my daughter, Sabrina. But if he is married, even comatose, the conditions are met." She leaned closer, voice a whisper. "Marry him, Chloe. Just a signature, just a ceremony, and in return, I will pay for your sister's surgery. Every cent. I'll even erase your father's debt." Chloe's breath caught. "You want me to marry a man in a coma?" "It's a legal transaction, nothing more. He'll never know, and your sister will live." The words echoed in Chloe's head long after Vivian walked away. That night, she visited the hospital, standing by Everett's bed. His face was handsome, even in stillness. Machines beeped gently around him. His chest rose and fell, as if in a sleep he might one day wake from. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to become your wife, so I can save someone I love." 3 days later, in a quiet hospital room, with 2 lawyers and a nurse as witnesses, the ceremony took place. Chloe wore a simple white dress that didn't feel like hers. The priest said the words, and she signed her name beside his. Everett didn't move. When it was done, Vivian smiled and clapped once, soft and satisfied. Chloe stood by the window, her hands shaking. "I'm the legal wife," she whispered to herself. Then, her voice broke, and the truth spilled out in a fragile exhale. "Of a man who doesn't even know I exist." The gates of the Galloway estate opened with a mechanical whir, revealing a mansion carved from stone and silence. Chloe stepped out of the black car, a small suitcase in hand, and stared up at her new home. It was beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful, grand, cold, and echoing with things untouchable. Inside, she was led through marbled hallways into a separate wing, a private suite with high ceilings, velvet drapes, and no warmth. No one welcomed her. No one smiled. She was now Mrs. Galloway, by name only. The house staff nodded curtly but avoided her eyes. Sabrina, the stepdaughter with honeyed curls and ice in her voice, offered only a disdainful glance as she passed. "I guess even maids get their fairy tale," she muttered. Chloe didn't respond. She wasn't here for approval. Her days passed in quiet obscurity. Meals were sent to her room. No one invited her to family meetings. No one asked if she was adjusting. But every evening, when the mansion dimmed and the world fell into hush, she found her way to the private medical suite down the east corridor. There, behind heavy oak doors, lay Damien Galloway. Only 29, yet lifeless as stone. A car accident had taken his voice, his awareness, everything but breath. He lay still, connected to machines that beeped steadily, a faint rhythm in the sterile room. At first, Chloe came only out of duty. She brought books and sat quietly in the corner. But something in the stillness softened her. Slowly, she began to speak. She told him about her sister, Ellie, how she loved strawberries and hated the color orange. She read him chapters from classic novels, wiped his hands gently with warm cloths, and sometimes just sat in silence, listening to the sounds of his slow breathing. He never stirred, but the room began to feel less empty. One night, after reading a passage from The Secret Garden, Chloe looked over and whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I hope you're not lonely in there." It surprised her how easily the words came. She began to notice the way his brow was always slightly furrowed, as if troubled even in sleep. She noticed a small scar near his temple. She wondered what kind of man he had been before the accident, before the silence. Not the tycoon on the magazine covers, but the real Damien. Then, one stormy night, she walked into the room and froze. Something was different. The IV bag hanging beside Damien's bed was not the same as usual. It had a different label, barely noticeable, but wrong. The nurse's chart didn't mention any medication changes. Her heart pounded. She glanced around. The room was empty. The night nurse had stepped out for a break. Cautiously, Chloe stepped closer, inspecting the bag. Her eyes narrowed. The dosage wasn't what it should have been. This wasn't part of his regular care. Someone had switched it. Her stomach turned. She quickly took a photo of the label with her phone and made a note in the margin of the medical logbook, as if by accident. Then she sat beside Damien, hand trembling as she reached for his. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered, "but something isn't right." He didn't move. But somehow, the room felt heavier, as if it too were holding its breath. She stayed longer that night, eyes flicking to the door every few minutes. When the nurse finally returned, smiling as if nothing had changed, Chloe forced a smile back. She didn't mention the IV. Not yet. But now, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a wife in name anymore. She was a guardian. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across the hospital-grade linens in Damien Galloway's private room. Then, suddenly, a gasp. The heart monitor beeped erratically. Damien's fingers twitched. A nurse dropped her clipboard, eyes wide. He's waking up." Moments later, his eyes fluttered open, blinking against the light, confused, strained. He drew a shallow breath, chest rising with effort. Then, through cracked lips, he rasped out his first words. "Where's my wife?" Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Vivian, who had just arrived with Sabrina trailing behind her, gasped in theatrical delight. "Damien, she exclaimed, rushing to the bedside. "You're awake, thank God." Sabrina squeezed his arm, overly sweet. "You scared us, big brother. We've been taking such good care of you." But Damien's tired eyes swept over them both, barely registering their excitement. "Where is she?" he repeated, voice stronger now, laced with confusion. "My wife. I remember. Someone said I had a wife." Vivian hesitated, then gave a practiced smile. "Of course, darling. You do, Chloe." "Chloe?" His brows furrowed. "Who the hell is Chloe?" And as if on cue, the door creaked open. Chloe stood there, in a pale sweater and jeans, holding a tray of tea like she had for the past 3 weeks. Her blonde hair was pulled into a soft bun, eyes filled with disbelief. Their gazes met. Damien blinked, assessing her. She froze under his stare, so sharp, so different now that he was awake, conscious, alive. He looked from her to Vivian. "You're telling me she's my wife?" "Yes," Vivian said smoothly. "You two were married while you were unconscious. It was legal. Everything was handled according to your grandfather's wishes." Damien's expression darkened. "So, let me get this straight. While I was in a coma, you arranged a marriage for me? To a stranger?" "She's not a stranger," Sabrina chimed in, venom tucked behind a smile. "She was a maid. Here." Then suddenly, "Mrs. Galloway." Damien turned back to Chloe. "Is this a joke to you?" "No," Chloe said, voice shaking. "It's not. I never wanted to deceive you. Save it," he snapped. She flinched. He pushed himself upright, despite the nurse's protests. His strength was still returning, but his anger gave him fire. "This is about the inheritance, isn't it? Get married before my 30th birthday and gain access to the estate. How convenient. You just happened to fall into my family's good graces while I was unconscious?" "Please," Chloe whispered. "It's not like that." But he didn't hear her. Or maybe he didn't want to. "I don't know what scam you're running, or how you convinced them to let this happen," he said, "but I want you out. Now." Vivian made a half-hearted attempt to calm him. "Damien, you need rest. Let's talk." "I said out," he growled, eyes fixed on Chloe. "You don't belong here." Chloe stood still for a moment, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to say something different. No one did. Without another word, she turned and left the room, the tray of tea still clutched in her hands. That evening, when the house had fallen quiet, she slipped back into the medical suite one last time. Damien was asleep again, exhausted from the shock of waking. She placed a folded letter on the nightstand beside him, her wedding band beside it. Then, back in her empty wing, Chloe packed her things. One bag, one broken heart. As she stepped out into the cool dusk air, a whisper escaped her lips. "I am the wife of a man who doesn't even know me." The room was quiet, but Damien's heart wasn't. He sat upright in the hospital bed, holding a folded letter with trembling fingers. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, Chloe's scent. He had found it on the nightstand, tucked beneath a glass of water, with his name written in delicate script. He unfolded it and began to read. "I don't expect you to believe me. I only want you to know the truth, before I go." Each line struck deeper than the last. She wrote of how she had been by his side every night, reading aloud to him, telling stories about her little sister, and adjusting his IV lines with trembling hands. She confessed she had once been terrified of him, a powerful man she had never met. But over time, watching him breathe in that sterile room, she had felt a strange kind of peace. She didn't love him, at least, not then. But she had protected him. She detailed 2 separate incidents. Twice, she had caught someone trying to alter his medication. Both times, it had been in the dead of night, and both times, she had stopped it, once confronting someone directly. She hadn't reported it, afraid no one would believe her, afraid it might cost her sister's safety. Damien finished the letter and sat in stunned silence. The warmth that had colored his anger before, righteous, confused, had gone cold, replaced now with a sharp blade of guilt. He had cast Chloe out without hearing her, without listening to the one person who had stood by him while everyone else assumed he would never wake up. And now, she was gone. But she had left behind a trail, and Damien Galloway had never been one to ignore his instincts. That morning, under the guise of needing rest, Damien requested limited staff in his room. As soon as he was alone, he pulled out a tablet and logged into the estate's private security system. Most of the footage from his in-home medical suite had been backed up, especially the night shifts. Damien sifted through days of data, fast-forwarding through endless hours of nurses adjusting machines, changing sheets, and checking vitals. And then, movement. He paused. It was just after 2 a.m., 3 weeks prior. The feed showed Chloe entering quietly, in her maid uniform. She sat beside him, took his hand in hers, and spoke. There was no audio, but the softness in her eyes said enough. He skipped ahead to the next night, and that's when everything changed. 2:12 a.m., Chloe entered again, but this time, she wasn't alone. A shadow appeared in the doorway behind her. Sabrina. Damien watched as Chloe suddenly turned, shocked, blocking Sabrina's path. Sabrina seemed to argue, holding a small object in her hand. Damien couldn't make it out clearly, but Chloe stepped forward, arms wide, as if guarding him. Sabrina shoved her. Chloe didn't move. Moments later, Sabrina turned on her heel and stormed out. Chloe, visibly shaken, stayed. Damien played that footage back 3 times. His jaw tightened. Chloe had not lied. Now alert to the possibility of foul play, Damien requested a full record of his medication logs. The estate's head nurse was hesitant. He was told Vivian had full medical authority during his coma, but Damien insisted. As CEO of Galloway Corp., he still held power. Hours later, a discreet file landed in his email. He cross-checked every entry. And there it was. 2 unrecorded entries, both on nights Chloe had mentioned in her letter, both marked as routine adjustments with no signature. Unacceptable. Damien arranged for a quiet meeting with Dr. Myers, the family physician. I need to know, Damien said, who had access to my medication. Dr. Myers looked uncomfortable. Your stepmother. And Sabrina. Sometimes. She insisted on helping care for you. Did Chloe ever have access? She was present, the doctor admitted, but only to assist. She never touched the medications, unless instructed. Damien's fists clenched under the table. He had misjudged her completely. Chloe hadn't come for his money, his name, or his title. She had stayed to protect him when no one else had. And now, he had to find her. But more importantly, he had to make things right. The tiny bakery on the corner of Maple and 6th was a far cry from the grand halls of the Galloway estate, but Chloe had grown to love its simple charm. The air always smelled like cinnamon and sugar. The bell above the door jingled like a soft greeting, and for a few precious hours each day, life felt normal again. Dressed in a plain apron dusted with flour, Chloe moved gracefully behind the counter. Her long blonde hair was tied loosely in a braid that hung over one shoulder, a few wisps escaping to frame her face. She had traded ballrooms for bread ovens, diamond chandeliers for the soft glow of a pastry case. And for the first time in months, her heart had begun to settle. Her younger sister Ellie, now recovering well after her surgery, sat in the corner booth drawing with crayons. Her pink dress fluffed around her like a cloud. Chloe glanced at her and smiled softly. Everything she had endured had been for Ellie, and it had all been worth it. The front door chimed. Chloe looked up, wiping her hands on a towel, and froze. Damien Galloway stood in the doorway. No suit, no entourage, just a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a look in his eyes that made her breath catch. He stepped forward slowly, the room suddenly quieter, as if the pastries themselves were holding their breath. "I'll take one of those," he said, nodding at a cinnamon roll. His voice was gentle, almost uncertain. Chloe moved stiffly, placing it in a small box and setting it on the counter. He slid a bill across the glass, then added softly, "You know, the first thing I asked when I woke up was, 'Where's my wife?'" She didn't answer. He smiled faintly. "Took me a while to find her, but I finally did." Chloe's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the box. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To apologize," he said simply, "and to ask for a second chance." She blinked. "A second chance? I judged you before I knew anything. I pushed you away when all you did was care for me. You risked everything to protect me, Chloe. And I was blind." Chloe looked away, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You said horrible things to me. You made me feel like I was nothing." "I know," Damien said, voice thick. "And I think about it every night. That letter, it broke me. I watched the footage. I saw everything. You were the only person who stood between me and whatever they were planning. You didn't have to, but you did." Chloe's eyes shimmered, but she stood tall. "You think one apology can erase what happened?" "No," he said quickly. "It can't. And I don't expect it to. But I'm not here because of a will or a contract. I'm here because, for the first time in my life, I want something for real. No lawyers. No strings. Just us." Chloe glanced at Ellie in the corner. The little girl had stopped drawing, her big eyes watching the two of them curiously. "I can't go back to that world, Damien," she said quietly. "I don't belong there." He smiled. "Then I'll meet you in yours." Chloe shook her head, emotion swirling behind her eyes. "Why me?" Damien stepped closer. "Because you showed me what it means to be loved without expectations. You saw me at my worst, and still stayed. I don't want to live another day pretending I'm whole without you." She looked up at him then, really looked. And what she saw wasn't the powerful CEO or the man in the headlines. It was the man who had quietly memorized her laugh from hours of unconscious comfort. The man who had returned, not for an image, but for a truth he had almost missed. "I need time," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," he replied. "I'll wait." And then, with a final glance, one filled with both pain and hope, Damien turned and walked out into the quiet street, leaving behind a cinnamon roll, a hopeful heart, and the beginning of something new. The children's Discovery Park gleamed under the early afternoon sun, alive with laughter, carousel music, and the scent of cotton candy. Chloe held tightly onto Ellie's tiny hand as they stepped through the arched gate, her eyes scanning the vibrant playgrounds, splash zones, and colorful tech exhibits funded by Galloway Innovations. "Whoa!" Ellie gasped, her pink dress fluttering as she bounced with excitement. "This place is magical." Damien chuckled from behind them, adjusting his sunglasses. "Well, I guess that's a pretty good review." Chloe turned, smiling at him. A smile not forced by politeness this time, but one that lingered. "Ellie," Damien said, crouching slightly to her level, "what would you like to try first?" Ellie looked around, eyes wide. Then she grinned mischievously and grabbed his hand. "The rainbow maze. But only if you come too." Damien hesitated. "Me?" "Yes, you." Ellie giggled. "You're tall. I need backup." Chloe raised an eyebrow, watching as the man who once lived behind boardroom walls and bodyguards was suddenly being pulled, literally, into a giant foam maze by a 6-year-old in a sparkly pink headband. "All right," Damien said, lifting his hands in surrender. "Rainbow maze it is." Chloe watched them go, her heart catching at the sight. She had never seen Damien laugh before, not like this. It wasn't his public smile, the one practiced for investors or charity galas. It was boyish, warm, human. Later, they sat beneath a shaded bench while Ellie devoured a melting swirl of ice cream, her cheeks sticky and eyes glowing. "She's amazing," Damien said quietly. "She's my whole world," Chloe replied. There was a pause. Then Damien reached into his satchel and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. "I brought something for you." Chloe frowned, accepting it cautiously. "What is this?" "Proof," he said gently, "that everything you said was true, that you cared." She flipped open the cover. Each page was neatly labeled: dosage logs, blood pressure readings, notations from the days Chloe had sat at Damien's bedside, copying vitals into her own notebook, one that had vanished after she left the estate. "You kept this?" she whispered. "I found it in a drawer," Damien said, "after you left. You'd recorded everything. I cross-checked it with the medical records. You were the only one paying attention." Chloe's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Her handwriting stared back at her like ghosts, evidence of nights spent sitting beside a stranger, hoping he would live. "I didn't think anyone would ever see this," she said softly. "But I did," Damien replied, "and I couldn't forget it." She looked up at him. His gaze didn't falter. "I know it doesn't erase what I said to you before," he continued, voice lower now, "but I wanted you to know. It mattered. You mattered." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but she blinked them back. "You could have ignored it," she said. "Let it disappear like everything else." "I almost did," Damien admitted, "but then I saw how Ellie looked at you, like you were her whole universe, and I realized I'd never looked at anyone like that before." The silence between them was gentle now, not awkward, just full. Ellie ran up a moment later, chocolate smudged on her chin. "Can we come back here again, Chloe? Can we bring him too?" Chloe smiled. "Maybe." Ellie turned to Damien. "Would you come with us next time?" Damien nodded, kneeling beside her. "I'd like that." She beamed, then threw her arms around his neck. Chloe watched them, heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they were becoming something more than strangers bound by circumstance. Maybe they were becoming a family. The headline spread like wildfire across tabloids and social media. "Maid marries comatose CEO to steal inheritance. Family betrayed." The accompanying photo showed Chloe stepping out of the Galloway estate, taken months ago, with a blurred zoom-in on her name badge. The article twisted every detail, accusing her of seducing a dying man, forging love to grab a fortune, and even implying Ellie was her bait to earn sympathy. By noon, her bakery job was gone. The owner, once warm and welcoming, pulled her aside with guilt in his eyes. "I can't risk the media showing up here," he mumbled. "Parents won't feel safe. I'm sorry, Chloe." She nodded, too numb to speak. Ellie didn't understand why they had to leave so suddenly, or why people were whispering behind them. Outside, cameras waited like vultures. At the Galloway estate, Damien stood frozen before the TV screen, fists clenched. Across the broadcast, a panel of experts dissected Chloe's motives, casting doubt on everything she had ever done. Poor billionaire. Duped while unconscious by a maid in debt. Tragic but predictable. One commentator sneered. His mother's face appeared moments later. Vivian, perfectly poised, seated beside Sabrina on a morning show. "We're devastated," Vivian said, voice thick with fake sorrow. "My son has always been trusting. Unfortunately, that trust was exploited." Sabrina sniffled theatrically. "We just want what's best for him." Damien's jaw tightened. Without a word, he called his PR manager. "Set a press conference. Today." 3 hours later, the media gathered outside Galloway Enterprises headquarters. Lights flashed as Damien stepped up to the podium in a charcoal suit, his face unreadable. He cleared his throat, looking straight into the cameras. "There's been a lot said about a woman I care about. Lies, cruel, calculated lies. The crowd hushed. She didn't steal from me. She never asked for money. She didn't even want to stay in my home. In fact, she left before I could apologize for how I treated her. A pause. Then he continued. When I was in a coma, someone tried to tamper with my IV. Twice. And she stopped them. Twice. She recorded every dose I was given, tracked every shift. She saved my life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporters scrambled to take notes. I have documentation, surveillance footage, and witness statements. And now, I'm pressing charges against two individuals who truly sought to take my life and my legacy. Vivian Galloway and Sabrina Galloway. Flashbulbs erupted. The air turned electric. They will be investigated for attempted medical interference, inheritance fraud, and defamation. I will not allow my name, or hers, to be dragged through the mud any longer. He looked directly into the camera, eyes blazing with purpose. Chloe Harper is the bravest, kindest person I've ever met. I only wish I had stood beside her sooner. Then, he stepped back from the podium. Across town, in a rented apartment, Chloe sat curled on the couch, her arms wrapped around Ellie. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but she ignored it, until the news anchor said Damien's name. She turned up the volume. By the time the press conference ended, her eyes were filled with silent tears. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time, someone had fought for her. Publicly. Fiercely. Ellie peeked up. Why are you crying? Chloe kissed her forehead. Because someone finally told the truth. Damien had stood up, not just for her reputation, but for her dignity. And for the first time since this began, Chloe no longer felt alone. The sun poured golden light across the open garden, where rows of white chairs lined a path of petals. Soft music played, mingling with the laughter of guests and the distant rustling of leaves in the summer breeze. Under a floral archway framed with lilies and wild roses, Damien stood in a tailored navy suit, his hands clasped in front of him. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on a small figure skipping down the aisle. Ellie, dressed in a pink tulle dress with little wings sewn on the back, tossed petals from a basket as she beamed with pride. I'm the flower fairy, she announced to the nearest row. Guests chuckled, some wiping their eyes already. Behind her, Chloe appeared. Her golden hair was left down, curling gently in the breeze. The white satin gown hugged her frame, elegant but simple. She held a bouquet of wildflowers and walked slowly, eyes locked on Damien's. He didn't look away. When she reached him, he took her hand. The music faded. The officiant smiled and began the ceremony, but Damien raised his hand gently. Before we begin, he said, turning to the guests, I have something to say. Chloe looked up, surprised. A year ago, Damien began, his voice steady but full of emotion. I woke up in a hospital bed and asked one question. Where's my wife? A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. At the time, I didn't know her name. I didn't know her face. And I certainly didn't know her heart. He turned to Chloe, eyes misting. But over the last year, I've learned who she is. A woman who risked everything to save a stranger. Who never asked for anything, yet gave so much. A sister, a caretaker, a fighter. Chloe's lips trembled. So today, he said, taking both her hands, I marry her again. Not out of obligation, not because of circumstance, but because now, I know that she's not just someone who saved my life. She is my life. I choose you, Chloe. Not because I need you, but because you are my everything. Tears slid down Chloe's cheeks as she whispered, yes. The vows were exchanged, soft, sacred promises whispered between two people who had already survived life's worst storms. And when the words, you may kiss the bride, were spoken, Damien didn't hesitate. He kissed her like a man who had once lost her, and knew never to let go again. The guests stood, clapping, cheering. Ellie jumped up and down, spinning in her dress. Later, under a canopy of lights and laughter, Damien, Chloe, and Ellie stood before a towering cake. Chloe held the knife with Damien's hand over hers, while Ellie clung to their side, giggling. "Ready?" Damien asked. Chloe nodded. Together, the three of them cut the cake. As they did, the lights above sparkled brighter, as if celebrating too. Cameras flashed, guests clapped, and Damien leaned down to whisper in Chloe's ear, "We started with a contract, but now, we've written a love story." She smiled through tears. Not the kind born of pain, but of healing. They weren't just husband and wife now. They were a family. And as the music swelled and the garden glowed with celebration, Chloe looked up at the stars and silently whispered, "Thank you for bringing me home." If this story touched your heart, if Chloe and Damien's journey from strangers to soulmates reminded